Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are gathering in this virtual space with so much going on, and I thank you for making space and time to be with us today. I hope that each of you watching or listening to us today is safe and healthy and finding ways to bring light and peace into your life and taking care of your whole self. We're delighted to have you join us for our first Dialogue in the Current Climate panel. Today's panel is about fostering dialogue and community in the current sociopolitical climate. And we gathered together today because the human need for fulfilling relationships and supportive communities will persist well beyond this election, throughout the pandemic, and alongside the movement for racial justice and equity. So this coming hour gives us an opportunity to hear from students and staff about how to navigate difficult conversations and to build or repair our communities in a polarized climate. Once again, welcome. My name is Chris Castro, he, him, his pronouns. I'm the program director and core facilitator of Madison Teaching and Learning Excellence here at the university, and I'm delighted to get to facilitate this panel today. A couple of housekeeping items before we dive in. First, we want to thank those of you who submitted questions and ideas in advance of our discussion today. We actually used your suggestions to create an outline for our conversation. And if you have additional questions about well-being, connection, or any topic after this panel, we want you to feel welcome and free to email the Office of Inclusion Education at inclusioneducation@studentaffairs.wisc.edu. I also want to let you know that this presentation is being captioned, and that link is listed in the description window under the YouTube video. And lastly, today's panel will also be available for later viewing, so you can watch this discussion at any future time using the same link. And now we're going to welcome our panelists who will introduce themselves. So we're going to start with Alice.
Excellent. Hi, my name is Alice Traore, and I use the pronouns she and her. Currently, I work on the campus, and I work with the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement. I am a facilitator for the Learning Communities for Institutional Change and Excellence. My learning communities, well, not my learning communities, but the learning communities are there to provide individuals who are seeking to introduce equity and fairness into the classroom or their workplace environments.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Annette McDaniel. I work in the School of Human Ecology at UW-Madison. I use she and her pronouns, and you see my kitty in the background. She may make an appearance now and again. But I work with undergraduate students and undergraduate education and our faculty and staff in the School of Human Ecology.
Hi, my name is Christian Figueroa. My pronouns are he, him, él. I am an intern at the Multicultural Student Center and at the Division of Diversity, Equality, and Educational Attainment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Larry Colon. I use the pronouns él, he, him. I'm the Leadership Development Specialist over at the Center for Leadership and Involvement, and also serving as a fellow for the Dean of Students Office. I'm also one of the founding members for the UW-Madison Latinx Academic Staff Association, and engage in further dialogue as well within the Committee on Campus Diversity and Climate as one of your representatives.
Thank you all so much for joining us today for this panel and for your time and your insights and your wisdom. So I want to start by asking each of you to offer some insights and wisdom and reflections on a question that I think gets to the heart of our discussion today. You'll each have about 5 minutes to share your thoughts. And so here's the question. Looking at your own spheres of influence on campus, those areas where you have the most immediate agency and opportunity for action, what do you see as one of the most important considerations when fostering dialogue in the current climate? And we're going to go ahead and start with you, Alice.
To this question, I want to start off by just saying that these responses are rooted in my own experiences and the observations that I take from the work that I do on campus. And so I want to make sure that folks know that I'm not positioning myself to speak for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. for all of them. Again, it's just from my experiences. But that's where my work focuses. So this is the angle that I'm going to come to you from. I'm thinking that I wanted to make sure that I made that distinction because I think that a lot of our conversations will be rooted in the very reason as to why marginalized folks will be asked their opinions in the upcoming post-election times. It'll either be to get the Black perspective or to gauge the fill in the blank with a race reaction to election results. Although it's 2020, I still feel the need to say that no individual is or can be the spokesperson for the race. So in working with BIPOC and in an effort to center ourselves and our experiences, I would ask that this particular community consider their health and their well-being first and foremost before entering post-election conversations. In predominantly white spaces, BIPOC grow accustomed to making ourselves accessible. Being the only or one or few, we readily and are expected to grant others to access our time, our thoughts, our ideas, and our experiences. And this isn't only for the workplace, but it also happens in the classroom. It's become akin to what James Baldwin referred to as the price of the ticket. And we get conditioned into thinking that we owe people our stories and our time. So an important consideration that I suggest to the BIPOC community when entering these post-election conversations is, who are you granting access to and why? The post-election results are going to only heap on to all that we're already bearing with. The pandemic and its financial, mental, social, and emotional fallout, the continuous quest for racial justice, along with the weight of what we're already carrying, all of those things that impact us personally. So to me, I feel like we need to guard our peace, our joy, our mental health and well-being as best as possible in the days to come. As people of color, we need to make our healing a priority and be mindful of where we're placing all of our energy. Racism on its own, and as well as how it intersects with other systems of oppression, is the great distraction that keeps us from being what we came here for. Oftentimes in white spaces, we put on the mask and we work hard to make folks comfortable around us. And I'm not talking about the N95 masks, but the ones that Paul Laurence Dunbar spoke of in his poem, We Wear the Mask. We are still placed in positions today where we're having to prove ourselves in the workplace and in the classroom. We have to prove our competence, our value, our worth, whether or not we're a team player. And for a lot of us, being a team player often translates to going along to get along. So before entering these conversations, as a person of color, I'm going to ask myself first a few questions. Am I accommodating someone else's needs? What do I need for myself right now? Who is this person to me? What kind of relationship do I have with them? Do I feel comfortable sharing my thoughts, my ideas, my lived experiences with this person? And I'm also going to pause to think about, what is this person seeking? Is it truly a deeper understanding of me? Is it a debate, or is it authentic exchange of ideas? And lastly, I want to just take a step back and think, is this person simply seeking someone to center, to validate, and or to educate them? When Dr. Cornel West speaks of us, he speaks lovingly of us. He often refers to our precious Black and brown bodies. I want you all to consider your Black and brown and slightly toasted and sepia colored bodies as we enter into this time of post-election. Put them first and hold them sacred. And ask yourselves, is this conversation the best use of my time and energy right now? Apply a bit of self-care and pause to ask yourself, does this conversation hinder or help my journey towards liberation and healing? And I think we'll have a little bit of time for going into depth around anything that I've talked about. But again, it's that point of taking care of ourselves and putting our health and well-being first.
Alice, thank you. I just want to take a moment to be very intentional and pace ourselves, because what you just said is so incredibly powerful. And as a fellow person of color, I appreciate your reminder to take care of myself and prioritize myself so that I can better serve others. So thank you for that, Alice.
You're welcome, Chris.
I want to jump now to Christian, and I'm wondering if you could offer your perspective as a student. How would you answer that question?
Yeah, well, Alice took a lot of what I wanted to say out of my mouth, but I guess adding on to what she said, as a student, we have to think about many of our overlapping identities, especially some of us who might be in more identity circles than others, being undocumented versus having citizenship, being white versus having Black. So a lot of those things are very pertinent to us, not only on a personal level, but also on an academic level. Like she said, when we go to class, we're having to prove ourselves. We're having to speak a certain way or dress a certain way, not step over certain boundaries, or not having our input taken seriously enough. And when you look at a perspective, you have to take a look into what spaces you can also access to foster dialogue. I'll probably mention this later, but in the Multicultural Student Center, we have these things, we have talking events called Tuvos, Invisibility, and Bununtu, where we're allowed to foster dialogue, and we have leading questions in order to get ourselves going. So it's important to create those safe spaces where students can foster dialogue, and looking out for spaces to do that is very important. And I would also think, concerning these spheres of influence, I personally have yet to see another place where spheres of influence are so regulated, so enforced. This campus, since we're in the Big Ten, is so huge, and many people try to find ways to make that community a little bit smaller, make it easier to handle the immenseness of this campus. And we do that by joining certain organizations, gathering around certain people, maybe joining sorority or fraternity. And those things consume a lot of our time. They consume a lot of our time. We form close connections with people as they become our friends. And I think that can be kind of dangerous, because you're kind of trapping yourself in this identity bubble because you want to do the best in whatever you're pursuing. You spend so much attention to that and the people around that. At times, it's hard to take yourself out of your position, out of the perspective you have of a student in that space. So I think just stepping out of your comfort zone, especially at university, is very important in fostering dialogue, because of the fact that we're so forced into these spheres of influence. At times we don't even realize it. I know that many times I have to think about what spheres of influence are affecting me as a student, just through my relationships with friends, with professors, with my bosses, everybody around me. And another thing that we have taking account, going back to our personalities, is or our multiple identities, is how they affect us, and being conscious that not everybody has the same identities or is affected to the same effect. Colorism is real in America. I identify as Latin American, Hispanic American, Chicano. But the fact that I have lighter skin might be different than another Hispanic who might have darker skin, or who is Afro-Latino or Afro-Hispanic. And those differences might play out in academic situations, in classes, in advisory sessions, in terms of what majors or areas of study they might want to produce, might want to go after. So just taking all that into account when talking about this, I feel is very important.
Thank you, Christian. I appreciate that reminder about ongoing self-reflection on our identities. And I think it's a beautiful juxtaposition of what Alice first presented in terms of taking care of ourselves, and now the challenge that you're presenting for us in terms of going beyond that bubble and that sphere of comfort as well. So I think that's something that we have to honor and respect at an individual level, and trust that each of us is making the best decision for ourselves. And I appreciate you bringing in that perspective. Larry, will you round us out with your thoughts from the Center for Leadership and Involvement, please?
Yes, absolutely. And the first thing that I want to mention is what Alice shared was really important in terms of taking care of yourself. We're in a very difficult time considering the economic, health-related, and racialized factors that are causing a lot of stress on us. So just know that the words that I have to share is not meant to be in contest with that. It's just meant to help support that or help provide some steps for action once we take time for ourselves and strategically think about how else we want to engage in these types of conversation. So here at the Center for Leadership and Involvement, I think one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is how leadership development and behaviors related with leadership can be thought about and used when you're thinking about creating dialogues with other folks and kind of affecting change. Now, I'm going to mention something that might be pretty obvious for the folks that are watching here today, but you know, we're in a very unique moment now in terms of the barriers that we're facing. But if we're looking at things through a racialized lens, this fight for racial justice is not new. It's been happening for a very long time in US history. But what I do think is important is realizing that this is like a section or a context where we can put more action towards the change that we kind of want to initiate. So pulling from something called our UW-Madison Leadership Framework, one of the principles that I think are particularly relevant right now from that is that context matters, and each situation requires unique engagement. So what I mean by that is that this current context, I look at this as a moment to build up momentum for things that you might be passionate about or how you want to affect change. Again, using that racialized lens, I just look at conversations that I have with some of my colleagues, with administrators, with other students. Everyone is interested now in conversations and topics related to social justice and inclusion. And the way I think about that now is, how do I capitalize that? How do I think about the moments and where I can drive those conversations forward so we can continue fighting for an equitable and just environment? So when I think about spheres of influence, I think about those different audiences that are willing to have those conversations and think about how we want to affect change. Now, and I particularly want to say this for our students, because I think that as a student here at university, you have a lot of power. You have a lot of say and agency in helping us drive these conversations and your ideas of change forward. So when I think about spheres of influence, I try to think about what are the strategic places where you can have those conversations and use your power or positionality in order to drive change. Some examples. And again, very well noted about our positionality as students, but student governance, that is a mechanism where you can try to drive initiatives forward. Grassroots organizing, you don't necessarily have to work within a system, but through that, if you get folks together with similar ideas, principles, and passions to drive things forward, that's another strong space. Also, us as administrators or potential mentors, like I've said before, we want to help think about how to bring those ideas forward and be challenged so we can drive those ideas of change forward as well. And another space that isn't thought about a lot of times because you're all busy, but local government and local politics and local community organizing are also spaces where you can try and affect change. I am going to talk about the idea of positive change a little bit in this panel, but just some initial ideas that I wanted to present.
Thank you so much, Larry. I'm cognizant of the time, and so I want to make sure that we get to everybody before we go into the next section. So, Annette, what is your perspective coming from the academic side of things, and what would be your answer to this question?
Sure. Thanks so much, Chris. So I'm going to speak a little less about the academic side, but as my identity as a cisgendered white woman in a position of authority on our campus, I feel like one of the most important things that I can do within my sphere of influence is to create a sense of calm and care for my staff, my colleagues, and my students. And to do that, I must ensure that I am first taking care of myself so that I can show up at my best. And I'll have some tips for that a little later on. Because it's easy, particularly again, as a white woman who has been socialized not to recognize and pay attention to her race, to respond to folks who have differing opinions than I do, differing lived experiences, to come to that response from a place of defensiveness, denial, and fear. And when I act out of a place of fear, I'm less likely to listen, I'm less likely to understand, I'm less likely to reflect or to grow. So one of the concrete actions that I take is to intentionally engage with other people who share similar identities with me, particularly people who identify as white or are raised as white, to investigate that role of our racial identity and to interrogate the relationship that it has with anti-racism, with oppression, and so that I can keep that change on the forefront of both my personal and professional life. Because we need to create spaces where we can listen and grow, but also to hold each other accountable so that we can move forward toward purposeful action. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. And once again, thank you, everyone. I think I just want to pull this first segment into one cohesive item here, that really the first sphere of influence that we have truly is ourselves. And there's a balance between the care that we give ourselves and then the care that we give the outer spheres of influence. And how much we do that will depend on our bandwidths, where we are, and that's going to vary from day to day. And I really appreciate that invitation of ongoing self-work in terms of management of the growth that we want to engage in, and also that space and time that we may need to take care for ourselves. So thank you all very much. We're going to move into the next segment of our panel. And on a related note to what you've all shared, we have some folks who are interested in hearing about some specific skills for diffusing difficult topics before a conversation gets heated. So how do we stay focused on productive dialogue when discussing heated or charged topics? So Alice, I'm going to invite you to answer this first question, and then we'll go through the rest of us.
Okay. Well, that is a tough one, because for most of us, we are lacking a sense of awareness, and it's not a fault of ours. It's just that in the society, we have never been taught how to be self-aware, how to slow down and get a sense of what our triggers are, how our past experiences will influence the conversation that you're having with someone right now. And so, like you said, Chris, the only thing that we're in control of in that moment is ourselves, our reactions, and our responses. So first, it's important to position, who are we talking to? Is this a stranger on a bus? Is it my colleague? Is it a student, my peer, something like that? So the relationship is going to matter. If the relationship is one that's personal, then I think it is fine to name what you're feeling, right? Like, ooh, things have escalated. Are we in a place to finish this conversation, or should we? It feels like we're both kind of losing focus on the purpose of our conversation. If it is with a stranger, someone that you don't know well, then I think you need to do some self-work in the moment, which is really hard to do, but some self-work in the moment and decide, what is the purpose of this conversation? Are we talking to come to some conclusion? Is this something that can just go on? And how do I gracefully bail out? Again, ego, all of those things come into play when we're in that situation. And so again, it's knowing who you are, what you want out of that conversation. And again, what is the relationship to the person that you're talking to? Is this a relationship that I want to salvage? So it's best that I let people know, hey, I'm feeling heated and I need to take a break from this. But when I'm feeling better, I'll come back to it. This is the hardest lesson to learn. In my line of work, I learned so much about myself at the same time that I'm doing the work. And it's hard. And I will just go back to self-awareness. What are your triggers? How self-aware of you that your temper is flaring, that you're about to explode, and then how can you work to diffuse your part? Because the only thing that you're in control of is yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alice. And Larry, I know that you have some thoughts around this question, so I want to ask you the follow-up, but you're welcome to offer your thoughts directly in response to what we just asked Alice. So would you be willing to share your thoughts about ways that you and the Center for Leadership and Involvement are encouraging and equipping student organizations and student leaders to engage in difficult conversations during this time? So both questions for you now, Larry.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Alice, those strategies are great. You know, we definitely need to take a step back and really think about, you know, what is leading up to this conversation and how might we react and how do we want to interact with the folks in this dialogue. The only other thing that I want to share, and I guess it's going along with the change component, is that when you're engaging in contentious dialogue, and it can be difficult in the moment, and I think you can definitely prepare for this depending on the topic, it's useful to find commonality in terms of the topic that you're discussing. You know, in the US, there's a whole political spectrum when we're thinking about different issues, whether it's related to racial justice, police brutality, education, healthcare, etc. But if you can think about what are the different ways that folks are approaching a conversation and what their perspectives are for that, sometimes there are ways to think about how you can bridge that gap. So there's that understanding. I think that was the only thing I wanted to share about that. But now thinking about how us at the Center for Leadership and Involvement and CFLY are trying to work with students and kind of prep them, I want to point to the leadership framework again. And specifically, the two other principles with that. One, that leadership is an action-oriented behavior. And then secondly, that when engaging in this action, that we're doing this for the mentality of positive change and that you're becoming a positive change agent. So when you're trying to have that effect on others or in your community, you're thinking about how these outcomes can be mutually beneficial for each other. And think about the conversations that kind of lead up to that so you can affect change. So some of the ways that we're doing that, and I just wanted to give a shout out to one of my colleagues, Selena Tapia, who's also one of the folks over at the Center for Leadership Involvement. We have some programming that we're getting ready for our student organization leaders. Specifically, if you want to talk with me again on November 18th, we're going to have a conversation about socially just leadership and how you foster an inclusive environment. And we have some other awesome programming. We're also going to talk about capacity building for your organization and how you can continue having these conversations. But now, I guess in the work that I do, one of the avenues where we talk about positive change and thinking about how you can have these conversations that lead to mutually beneficial outcomes, one's through the leadership certificate. One of my favorite parts of my work, because I meet with grad, undergrad, and professional students that come to me interested in thinking about how they build their capacity to being a leader, how they can define what their leadership style is, and what specific behaviors related to leadership they want to either address or grow or whatnot. And a lot of times when I think about those conversations, I think about, what do you stand for? What are you passionate about? Because if you can center those things that kind of drive and propel you forward, then it becomes easier to engage in dialogue. It becomes easier to state your opinions and how you want to drive these different types of actions. And we also work with students that find out, maybe they're thinking about, I want to address hunger in my community, but I don't know how to get started. At CFly, we also talk about, well, what are the different organizations or offices or researchers done in the community so you can do this work. There are many folks in the Division of Student Affairs that are particularly interested in making sure that your idea of action coalesces, and we'll work together to figure out who do we have to connect you to so that we can have these conversations. So I think that's one of the other methods that we're kind of doing that.
Thanks, Larry. I really appreciate the other side of self-awareness that you brought into the conversation through the work that you do, which is self-awareness on your strengths, not just your emotion and the human component of things, but what are your strengths and how do those line up with things that you can do? So thank you for sharing. We've got a next question from the audience, and this one we're going to direct to Christian. And so I'll just read it for us. We know that this is a difficult time for many of our students during a critical period in their lives. Students, especially first-year and transfer students, are already in a time of transition and change. For many, this is their first election or first time away from home. They're negotiating and figuring out their own opinions and boundaries on a whole host of topics and personal issues. Christian, what do you think students need to best navigate the current sociopolitical climate?
Yeah, I mean, I come from like a very political family. I myself am interested in politics. My major is in political science, international studies, and economics. I want to go into politics after this. So like talking about politics has always been something I've been very passionate about, something I've been very careful talking about. So when I try to converse with students or just anybody in terms of politics, I try to like Alice and Larry said, have patience. Some people you need to have patience for yourself, patience for others. This is a learning process that is continuous and never stops. And some people are going to try to be instigated. And at that point, you have to have the patience and think about if you want to continue that conversation, because it might not even be productive. Another thing I would like to mention is concerning the argument. You can have civil arguments. You don't have to yell at each other. You can just talk. And it's the content that matters too. Know what you're talking about. Do your research. We're at University Wisconsin, they funnel a lot of money into research, into news access. So we have so many sources we can go to for information. So knowing what you're talking about is really important, because sometimes there are small details and nuances that can change the whole direction of your beliefs and your arguments. And that can really affect the person you're talking to, know your quotes, know what you're saying, know where it comes from, know how reliable the bias. There's so many factors that go into this, and it's a lot to handle, but that's because these conversations are very important and they do mean a lot. So that's something I would really want to put forward, and just be very careful about your expectations for yourself and other people. I know we kind of talk about this, but maybe somebody thinks they're very knowledgeable about the topic, but you realize they might not be, or you realize you yourself might not be that knowledgeable. So just setting very few or specific expectations that you can meet. Did I do my research? Yes. Am I going to expect a lot of this person? No. Those kinds of expectations are going to help foster a very productive conversation, because you're not going to get kind of angry or ticked off if this person doesn't meet your expectations, or if you fail to meet your own. So just setting good expectations is a very good way to foster dialogue, especially on campus, where at times we're learning and we think we know everything, and we think that your opinion is right. So it's just things like that I too try to work towards and practice towards.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Christian. I really appreciate that reminder about radical self-compassion and also humility and kindness in our conversations. And thank you for that advice about setting and calibrating expectations. That's something that I myself need to be working on. So I appreciate you mentioning that. So now I'd like to ask you, Annette, a question that was submitted. Given all of the potential distractions, emotions, and environments during this time, especially since many students are experiencing classes and community in a virtual environment. Could you share what schools and colleges are doing to encourage and support students in the academic realm?
I'd be happy to. I appreciate this question because you're right on. With so much happening on campus in the world, it can be really hard, students, to prioritize your academic responsibilities and your learning, the things that you're here to do. So lots of resources available to you, but first and foremost and most critical, all schools and colleges on this campus have teams of academic and career advisors, and 100% of what they do is in support of students. And it's easy if you're not physically on campus all the time to forget that these offices exist. They haven't gone away. In fact, we've really bolstered many of our efforts in terms of access to advising, expanding times and ways of interacting with these important support people. So reach out to your academic and career advisors. If you haven't been doing so, you're really missing out on a great support system. A couple of other examples that I just want to highlight. I'm in the School of Human Ecology, so I'm more familiar with what's happening there. And one of the efforts I just want to highlight that we've been really engaged in deeply since the spring is comprehensive education and outreach and support for our instructors so that they can enhance their online teaching skills, and also so that they can recognize what to watch out for if you're suffering, so that we can notify and recognize and respond any concerns about student well-being. We've also set aside extra scholarship dollars so that we can address any unanticipated student financial needs. We know your life is unpredictable, and so we're trying to be proactive. And many of my colleagues across campus are also engaging in these same efforts. A few other examples from other places. College of Engineering is putting together study interest groups, so to help combat that sense of isolation, but pairing those study groups based on course schedules so that you can facilitate that engagement with other students in your classes. My fabulous colleagues over in the School of Education made individual calls to each and every one of their students to both offer support and assess need. And their learning centers, you know, your studies are important and you have to reach out for help sometimes. So Letters in Science has centers in math and writing and chemistry and physics and more. So those are all available remotely right now. And in case you just don't know even what the issues are or what support you might need, talk to your advisor. It's a great place to start.
Thanks, Annette. I think it's so good to hear that help seeking is actually a sign of strength. Yes. So thank you for that reminder. Absolutely. So going along the same theme of academics, there's another question that relates to the academic realm that I'd love to answer, given my role in Madison Teaching and Learning Excellence, MTLE. It was submitted as follows. What suggestions do you have for fostering more meaningful discussion in a class setting? So I'm going to offer a couple of thoughts, and then Alice, just to prompt you, I'm going to invite you to add to that in just a few minutes. I'm actually going to begin with, and I'm just going to name this. This is perhaps going to be a somewhat unsatisfying answer, but an answer that needs to be given. This question assumes that you've done the step 0 of assessing your bandwidth. And I really want to invite everyone listening, if you're in the academic realm and you're teaching and you have students and you feel the need to talk with your students about these issues, I really encourage you and give yourself permission to assess your bandwidth, because the reality is that we're also in the middle of a world pandemic and we're all coping and managing our emotions differently. And so if we are not self-aware and very radically clear with ourselves on what it is that we can do in the classroom, we could do more harm than good. So once you assess your bandwidth, which can go from low, like I cannot even engage in conversation right now, and no judgment in that, to very high, like, you know, I feel pretty good. I can do this. I'm going to go ahead and step in the classroom and have these discussions. Once you've assessed that bandwidth personally, also assess your pedagogical bandwidth in terms of experience and your class experience, meaning, have you actually facilitated a discussion before? Has your class throughout the semester been engaging in these discussions? And not necessarily around this topic, but around other topics, so that the process of having a discussion is something that they're familiar with. Because if you've been having a class that's mostly lecture, maybe a couple of exercises here and there, to expect that your students are going to be able to have a dialogue productively in class after the election is, I think, not well calibrated. So I just wanted to say that, own it, name it, recognize it, and put it into the space. And now let's move into the you've done your work and you realize that, yeah, you actually want to have this. I would say that two things. Number one is that if you choose to have the dialogue in the classroom, spend the time creating a really solid structure where the focus of the dialogue is not on emotions, but rather on a specific topic. And I know that my colleagues on the tech side managing things behind this panel have a website. The University of Michigan, the Center for Teaching in Research and Learning, has one of the best resources on how to structure dialogue in your classroom in a really thoughtful way. So that resource is available for you. They're showing it to you right now to have a visual anchor, and the link is available in the description as well. So please do dedicate time to structure a really, really good outline of that discussion. I would encourage you to do what I call an emotional liberation moment. I've had the opportunity to teach throughout my teaching career on several contentious subjects. And one thing that I know is really helpful is to give people the permission to name their feelings. And the way that can be operationalized in the classroom is that you create a minute for people to take out a piece of paper and write how they're feeling as they're going into this conversation about X. Have them write it down, and then have them honor those feelings and put them aside for a minute as they engage in that conversation. Just having people move feelings from heart and gut up to head gives them agency to be able to control those feelings more. And then the next thing that I'll say is that it's really, really important for you to give the opportunity, give heads up to students to opt out of these conversations, because we need to recognize that they may not have the bandwidth to engage for whatever reason. I can tell you that as a person of color, international, when Obama was elected in 2008, for me, I was not naturalized. I hadn't voted. And so for me to step into conversations was incredibly weird. And, you don't know where your students are coming from. So give the opportunity to opt out. And the final thing that I'll leave you with before I yield to Alice is think carefully about discussion guidelines. How do you want to structure the way that this discussion happens? And I encourage you to read Özlem Sensoy and Robin DiAngelo's Respect Differences. And that's the emphasis on the question is intentional. That's the name of the article, Respect Differences, by Özlem Sensoy and Robin DiAngelo. We can link it later for how to build social justice responsible guidelines that honor the power dynamics that exist in your classroom. I'll stop there. Alice, what do you have to add?
Wow, those were all great, Chris. I just have a few to add. I love the recommendation of that article. I think it does give instructors, professors, the space to talk about why these guidelines, and especially if they're leaving space for their students to introduce other guidelines. We also talk about community agreements in our small group, in our learning communities. And what we're talking about right now is, why have we put some of these in place, and might they also serve to still create a level of comfort where we can't dive deep? So just really questioning what is behind some of our community agreements. So just to add on to some of the things that you mentioned, Chris, I love the idea of just giving students the space to write about how they're feeling and where they are right there in the moment in the class. That's very much like a check-in that we would do in our small groups. We invite people to talk about a subject. So if there was a small class and time allowed it, you might throw out a question that allows people to step beyond the walls of the classroom and really bring their personal selves into that space for a little bit of time. So it just gives individuals a chance to share what's going on inside of them. And it also gives others a little bit of insight as to who they are. So those are check-ins. For lecture groups, that check-in might be the journaling exercise that Chris suggested. Another thing is, in terms of faculty, think about the class that you're teaching and how much of the real world are you letting into the classroom. So there's so much going on around us, and some students may be feeling a level of frustration and resentment that the real world isn't entering your classroom, that you're still operating as though we're on class, we're not working remotely, students aren't taking their classes from their laptops miles away from campus. There's this assumed that everything is fine. How often do you take the advantage to let the real world in? Your students might find that so refreshing and just a space to breathe, that I can't study right now, or I'm finding it really hard to talk about Shakespeare right now because another unarmed Black person has been shot in the streets, and we're pretending like everything is fine, and you're expecting me to show up in the way that I would show up any other day, and I just can't do it. So it's letting space for what's happening. And again, I think what you said, Chris, making sure that as the professor, as the TA, that you are ready to handle what comes in if you open that door.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Alice. I think you're reminding me of the power of what we're talking about here, in that this is just an amazing best practice to humanize the teaching and learning experience, not just in this season, but every day. So I think this is a good reminder for us that we're not emotional just during the election. We're always emotional beings, and our full selves should be welcomed into the space and honored. So thank you for that, Alice. Mm-hmm. I think that, let's see here, we've had a few questions related to this topic. What practices help us foster self-care, community care, and well-being within our communities and ourselves? Larry, would you like to share your thoughts first, and then we'll move to Christian to get the student perspective?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think a lot of the strategies I've talked about have been related to engaging in contentious dialogue, pushing action forward, moving forward. But again, what Alice has already mentioned about thinking about well-being, what Chris has mentioned about checking your bandwidth. Yesterday at the Diversity Forum, Austin Channing Brown also talked about how we need to make space for ourselves and really value like our own livelihoods. It's super important, because you'll notice that as you engage in further political dialogue, as you engage in further social justice work, it's hard. And a lot of this work is lonely, especially as you're mentioning things that folks don't want to hear. So one of the first suggestions I have is remembering that community is vital. It is so important for your livelihood. And I'm mentioning this for all of my people of color, students of color, Latinx people, other folks from other marginalized communities. What is that center base that you can come back to and be able to decompress, have fun, make memories, laugh, and be in community with people that understand who you are and share some of those same lived experiences? I think that's super important. I think the second thing too, thinking about it from more of an individual aspect, is your own health. And sometimes, and this isn't not just students, but my own colleagues as well, are surprised when I ask them, like, did you go eat lunch today? Did you drink water today? Have you gone outside, or have you been at your desk all day? You have to do those individual aspects too to take care of yourself, because if you're not feeling good, if you're not feeling healthy, hydrated, fed, warm, how can you expect to be your best self? How can you expect to give to others, especially when you engage in this type of work, which takes so much away from you? You need to be able to take care of yourself. And finally, the last thing that I'll say is that, post-election next Tuesday, or as you keep engaging in these difficult conversations related to social justice, you should also have things to look forward to, and this is not me trying to minimize these conversations or this work, but, I'm hoping that we have lives that are filling and dynamic and have other aspects to it. Some of the things that I look forward to are like cooking and eating delicious food. I like watching basketball and hanging out with my friends, and I think that's super important too. I think oftentimes when we engage in these types of conversations or do this type of work, we might perceive that as unproductive, but it's incredibly productive. It's really important to have these other outlets to kind of decompress and enjoy yourself and have fun, so that when you do that, you're re-energized and can head back to the important work that you want to do.
Sure. Appreciate that. Christian, what about you? We lost Christian, so let's go to Annette. Unfortunately, we had a Wi-Fi issue apparently, but Annette, what do you have for us?
Excellent. Well, knowing I was getting this question, I polled my fabulous team of advisors and career services folks for their input, and they have shared lots of the wisdom that we've already heard today. I won't repeat those things, but a couple of things that haven't been mentioned. One of the things that we're hearing a lot from students is the difficulty in managing time right now, particularly when you've lost the anchors for having a schedule in your life. So the importance of setting a daily schedule and routine for coursework and for breaks, and doing your best to stick to that schedule. Another thing that is interrupting our well-being right now is the constant flood of information. So turning off notifications on your phone and on your computer, particularly while you're in class. Oh, great. I see some of these tips coming on the screen right now. That website for guts.wisc.edu, those resources, they have lots of tips for time management and also tips for kind of helping you focus when you're getting so many different streams of information and so many distractions coming at you. Your brain and your body and your mind and your eyes and your ears need breaks from screens. So finding time to do that. And another thing I just want to mention is, so consistent with the tips that we heard from Alice about recognizing when you have that capacity and when you don't. Communicating proactively with your instructors now. If you are having issues staying focused on class, maintaining that communication, because what can be a small issue right now, if you don't address it, it may compound and get to the point where there aren't easy solutions to the things that you're facing later on in the semester. So articulate your needs, keep in communication with your instructors and your advisors, ask for help, and yes to Austin Channing Brown, experience joy. I hope that you all had a chance to watch her yesterday.
Thank you for that. Annette and Alice, I wonder if you have any final thoughts on this specific question that you want to share with us.
I think what people have shared already is great. This is all good stuff to put in your toolbox. I've also, during this time period of working remotely and so forth, I've been asking myself a lot of questions around who is truly a part of my support circle. This might be a time when you're finding that there are people that you go to for certain things, specific things, people that uplift your spirit, people that are great reflectors of things that you might be doing that might not be the best thing for you right now. It's been a really great time for me to really slow down, pause, and take assessment of who's got my back and who can I really turn to. I have called people, talked to people more so than ever. I'm basically a loner, but I have really needed people lately, and it's been really important that I get rejuvenated in that time that I spend with these individuals. And so it's been critical. And I mean, it's been a great time for me to say, wow, this relationship takes a lot of energy away from me. So is it the best relationship for me to keep? It's been a good time to do some house cleaning socially. And just one other thing, on the social justice tip, I have been examining the things, my actions, behaviors that no longer serve me well. And I am learning to articulate what I need from colleagues, from my husband, from friends and family. Usually I try to be the strong one, carry things on my own, work it out on my own. But when I need help lately, I ask for it.
Thank you, Alice, for that. And I was checking in with my tech team, and it looks like, Christian, we have you back. We lost you there for a second. I wonder if you have anything you want to share with us in maybe 30 or 45 seconds around self-care.
Yeah, make sure you get good Wi-Fi. But besides that, in terms of self-care, going off what Larry said, just talking about, going back to what Larry said, talking about community. You know, I live with two Latinx identifying folks. I work for the LCC. I'm part of Latinx organizations. And just like building that community that you can fall back on and you can defend on, you know, you can like help yourself by having a space to do that. I know UHS has like Hispanic centered like services that I've actually accessed myself. So using them as a resource in the university resources that are available to you to get to help yourself, to help others, and to help your community.
Christian, thank you. I'm glad that we have you with us for the closing part. And I also want to thank all of the participants for sharing your time and insights and wisdom with us. Of course, we could be here all afternoon, but time is up for us. So friends listening and watching, we hope that these strategies for fostering dialogue and community will be helpful to you or your students during these often challenging times. Please know that we and our colleagues are here to support you. You can find more resources for creating dialogue on the Office of Inclusion Education website at inclusioneducation.wisc.edu under the Resources tab. We also want to invite you to participate in our next panel on Monday, November 2nd, same time, noon to 1 p.m. Central Time. And that panel will be on unpacking the impact of the election on underrepresented communities. Our panelists at that time will offer their personal experiences and resources for deeper insight into the effects of the upcoming presidential election on communities of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ+ communities, and other underrepresented populations. You can, of course, submit questions and get more details by visiting the Office of Inclusion Education website, and again, navigate to the Resources tab. There will also be 2 opportunities for discussion spaces next week, one on Thursday, November 5th, and another one on Friday, November 6th. Both sessions will be from noon to 1:30. And once again, you can find the links to register on the Inclusion Education website. Lastly, we invite you to fill out our short 3-question survey about today's panel by visiting the link that is posted on the screen. And with that, friends, we thank you for attending this panel, and please take care of yourselves. And thank you everyone on the panel as well. Be well.